2019 is drawing to a close, and very soon we'll be ushering in a new decade, hopefully filled with new MMORPGs to play on top of seeing the ones we currently love continue. Unfortunately, we also lost a bunch of MMORPGs over the last 9 years, and in this video we'll take a brief look back at these games and remember the good times, or bad, that's up to you. I'm Adrian, welcome to the channel, let's begin. In 2014, Carbine Studios and NCSoft launched WILDSTAR, a subscription-based theme park MMORPG that offered a vibrant world filled with all the core offerings you'd expect, while promising a lot more to the hardcore endgame crowd. Its production values were high, befitting a AAA MMO, which it was. It had an interesting combat system with its telegraph manual aiming, a compelling sci-fi fantasy setting inhabited by characters with attitude, and let's not forget its player housing system, which was probably one of the best around at the time. I played for quite a bit and enjoyed the experience to the level cap, and then slowly started losing interest due to the lack of substantial game updates, on top of the tedious rating attunements to get into that hardcore stuff that other MMORPGs were handling better. The game, while well received, never quite reached the level of popularity to justify its subscription fee, leading it to a free-to-play transition the following year in 2015. By then, senior figures at Carbine had already moved on, as did many of the players who all went back to where they came from. By 2018, Carbine was running WILDSTAR with a skeleton crew and basically no budget, and NCSoft put it out of its misery in November 2018. This one hurt the most for me, having followed the game from announcement all the way to the end, and I was there for its final moments when the lights eventually went out. So what ended up killing WILDSTAR? Was it the lack of endgame diversity for all types of players and not just the hardcore raiders? Or that Carbine hung onto the subscription model for longer than they should have? Was it the slow updates between content drops? Honestly, it's a combination of everything and then some, which is a shame because WILDSTAR will go down as one of the more recent MMORPGs that had one or more elements which players actually liked to be taken away from them far too soon. When Japan's Phantasy Star Online debuted in 2001, critics praised it as a groundbreaking console MMO, with fun gameplay that was built to last. Its 2006 successor on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360, Phantasy Star Universe, however, was a bland entry that featured repetitive dungeon-crawling gameplay, and many saw it as just an avenue to milk the success of the franchise, while working on something better. That something better eventually arrived in the form of Phantasy Star Online 2, while Phantasy Star Universe was shut down in North America at the start of the decade in 2010, while it lasted for 2 more years in Japan. Here's a well-loved MMORPG on this list, it's City of Heroes, taken away from its players far too soon as well. There was plenty to like about this superhero MMORPG, from the gameplay, the customization, the community. It really, City of Heroes set the bar for subsequent superhero MMOs like Champions Online, DC Universe Online, and the upcoming Ship of Heroes to match, but none actually have. Unfortunately, in 2012, NCSoft pulled the plug for reasons that are still being debated about in recent times, ignoring the massive pleas from its player base to reconsider, which only intensified the angst and distaste that many former players have towards NCSoft today. Developers Paragon even tried to buy the rights of the game from NCSoft, but to no avail. While devastating at the time and the few years that followed, thankfully the game is back thanks to the Homecoming private servers, which I'm sure many of you know about. And if you didn't, well, time to dust off that cape and jump back in. This next MMORPG has a record that no other MMORPG wants, and that's for being shut down 3 times in a row. We're talking about Warlords Awakening, also known as Elite Lord of Alliance. It featured a standard top-down MMORPG gameplay in a fantasy theme park setting, and the developers talked up the game's PvE content offering, which, having played it before it shut down the final time, wasn't all that great as they made it out to be. The game has a really confusing history from its conception to the Western release, with it first launching in the East via WebZen back in 2015. The game surprisingly launched in North America shortly after, with an illegal copy being used by a Western company. Legal battles ensued, and the rushed Western version was shut down twice. In 2018, the game made a comeback with Play With Interactive under the new name Warlords Awakening on Steam through official means, but it only lasted for a year before eventually going away for good in June 2019. Now on to the only MMO shooter on the list, and it's hard to forget, FIREFALL. Released in July 2014, FIREFALL clicked with a lot of players, and the huge hype surrounding its E3 announcement years prior showed. The game was ambitious, had a unique look, and offered fun gameplay with RPG elements in a persistent environment that pushed all the right buttons for me personally, and I remember having so much fun in the beta leading up to its launch. As pilots of your exoskeleton suit called battle frames, it felt great to move around, shoot some stuff, and progress your chosen class in the tropical world. And it's because of FIREFALL that I eventually went on to check out similar games in the genre like PlanetSide 2, and continue to be a fan of MMO shooters today. Sadly for FIREFALL, its launch period was plagued with management splits, layoffs, and financial issues, and the game eventually closed for good in July 2017, with developers Red 5 Studios giving its players a hasty 2 days notice period about the closure, which was pretty messed up. You may or may not have heard of Dragon's Dogma Online, an MMORPG on the PlayStation 3 and 4 that's also a follow-up to 2012's JRPG Dragon's Dogma, which was pretty popular at release. Coming out in Japan in August 2015, the game saw early success with over 1 million downloads within the first month, but developers Capcom didn't see any reason to localize the game for other markets. In fact, sources claim that Capcom was hesitant to spend any money on more servers, which meant no regional expansion, and that didn't help because popularity of the IP was growing. Speaking to players now, the game itself was fun to play, had interesting classes like the Alchemist, and the only downer was the loot box situation. Alas, Dragon's Dogma Online was officially shut down recently on December 9th, 2019, in fact, to leave players wondering what might have been if Capcom had imported the game to the West like it did for the Monster Hunter franchise. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, even before Star Wars The Old Republic came into existence, there was only one Star Wars MMO to rule them all, and that was Star Wars Galaxies. Launched in 2003 by Sony Online Entertainment, known today as Daybreak Games, and published by LucasArts, by all accounts, this was the go-to MMO to get your Star Wars RPG fix. It offered anything and everything under the sun thanks to its sandbox approach, with its player-driven economy, legendary player events, interesting professions, and the progression, which, for example, does not let you play as a Jedi right off the bat. You had to go earn it. Many of my peers and friends will tell me that I missed out on the experience of a glorious sandbox Star Wars MMO, and it's one of my regrets today that I never got to experience the game at its peak, due to being too young at the time. Anyway, Star Wars Galaxy's trajectory towards the end of its life service was not a smooth one, and the game went through some shaky times. The last expansion introduced the New Game Enhancements, or NGE, which upset many subscribers at the time, and eventually the game shut down at the end of 2011, but not without a final in-game hurrah organized by players and devs. What's interesting is that Star Wars Galaxies went offline just 5 days prior to the release of the current ruling Star Wars MMORPG, Star Wars The Old Republic. At least several private emulators exist today, which means those who have never experienced it like myself can get a small taste of the game. If you follow the MMORPG genre closely, you have surely heard of Bless Online, or what became of it. The product of NeoWiz from South Korea, the tale of Bless Online will go down in modern MMO history as one filled with comedy and tragedy. Bless, as the Korean version is known as, announced that it would be coming to the West in late 2017, which, for whatever reason, gained momentum and hype from continuous media plays and influencer promotions, right here on YouTube mostly, which eventually led to it earning the tag of the next big South Korean MMORPG to arrive on the global stage. Many bought into the idea of a buy-to-play payment model with a non-pay-to-win MMO approach that aimed to remedy what Black Desert Online and Arcade were doing with their games. In the lead-up to the open beta in early 2018, warning signs started to appear. Other regional versions of Bless in Japan and Russia were faltering and nearing closure, with reviews of the game being shockingly bad. When launch arrived, yours truly jumped in for a review, and players were not exaggerating. The gameplay was painfully average, the much talked about revamped combat system felt very clunky, the performance and optimization was a joke, and the localization left a lot to be desired. Needless to say, reviews in the West were brutal as well, and the game eventually went free to play and managed to drag itself further on for a few more months before pulling the plug on itself this year. Unfortunately for NeoWiz, Blast has become an MMO meme. the epitome of an overhyped Eastern import that sadly will affect all future new South Korean MMORPGs that plan to release on the global stage. You'll hear it all the time, I guarantee it. Is this going to be another Bless? Is this Bless 2.0? And so on. But if you thought you'd seen and heard the last of Bless, you haven't. Under Bandai Namco, an Xbox One version called Bless Unleashed is about to launch in the near future, having been in open beta recently, featuring similar classes, gameplay, and story. Folks, the saga continues. For games 9 and 10, we have two from an MMORPG franchise that's still ongoing today, but the same cannot be said for these. EverQuest Next and EverQuest Landmark. Where did it all go wrong? For a brief summary, EverQuest Next was announced in 2013 by Daybreak Games, formerly Sony Online Entertainment, as the next-generation EverQuest MMO that offered a parallel world of Norath for fans of the franchise. Development went on for a couple of years, and during the midst of that, Daybreak announced another new game, EverQuest Next Landmark, which will go on to be known as Landmark, and the purpose of Landmark was to give players a sandbox content creation tool for EverQuest Next, and said content will be imported over to EverQuest Next when that launches. If that wasn't confusing enough, development focus was shifted between the two, and eventually, EverQuest Next was cancelled on 11 March 2016, having never launched. Landmark, on the other hand, did launch on June 10, 2016, but was only live for 7 months before shutting down in February 2017. I'm summarizing events here, but there was plenty of stuff happening behind the scenes that still leaves players confused and upset about the whole situation, considering time, effort, and money was all spent to see these games go through. Daybreak's president at the time said of EverQuest Next's closure that it was no longer fun putting the pieces together and that it didn't meet expectations. Boo-hoo. Needless to say, I don't think we'll see another studio do something as insane as developing two MMOs in tandem like we did here ever again. We have another superhero MMORPG on the list, and it's Marvel Heroes. Launched in 2013, Marvel Heroes was a top-down ARPG-style MMO that gave Marvel fans an online world to have fun in, featuring PvE and PvP, an impressive roster of well-known characters, constant movie tie-in updates, and new content at a time when the MCU was at its height in popularity. This did the game so much good until it announced the console version titled Marvel Heroes Omega, and that's when things started going downhill. Gameplay changes to accommodate console were not popular with players, in addition to the studio, Gazillion Entertainment's head at the time, being at the center of harassment scandals and more, which ultimately led to Disney announcing that it was ending its relationship with Gazillion, and that meant that Marvel Heroes would be shutting down at the end of 2017. As a Marvel fan, I discovered the game way too late and only managed to play it for a month before the game went offline. Sometime in 2018, rumors of a revival sparked when Trion Worlds purchased the Marvel Heroes assets, but Trion themselves would end up being bought by Gamigo, which killed any hopes of a revival. Or did it? Till today, no word on whether we'll see another Marvel MMORPG again. Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning probably had the best PvP and RVR experience out of every game on this list. Everyone I've talked to who has played it tells me similar things. It's got challenging PvP content, fun public quests, and siege battle memories that will last forever. Games Workshop and Mythic Entertainment launched Warhammer Online, or WAR for short, in 2008, and it was pretty popular for a time, with peak sales being at over 1 million copies sold with 800,000 active subscriptions in the first couple of months. But towards the end of 2009, the subscription numbers started dropping, and the company reported a loss of over $1 billion, and that reverberated around the MMO industry, with many questioning if the subscription model was still viable for the future. For WAR, they had to cut down operational costs, shut down servers to consolidate the population, but it was all for nothing because their license agreement with Games Workshop, who owns the Warhammer IP, had come to an end, and that was it. It's a real pity too, because Mythic was working on a free-to-play transition for Warhammer Online, like what many of its competitors, especially over at Turbine Studios, were doing with the Lord of the Rings Online and Dungeons & Dragons Online, which, as time would tell us, has paid off big time due to going free-to-play, since they're still alive and going. Would things be different if WAR had more time to complete its free-to-play move? Who knows? The good news is private servers do exist today, and if you've not played Warhammer Online and like RVR gameplay, you should definitely check it out over at Warhammer Online: Return of Reckoning. This one's not a conventional MMORPG, in fact it's far from it, and everyone's favorite punching bag, NCSoft, is involved again. Master X Master, or MXM for short, was a hybrid MOBA-infused MMO launched in 2017 that sought to bring as many of NCSoft's MMORPG player base over, and banked on them to carry the game far enough to challenge the status quo of existing MOBAs. It's a pretty far-fetched dream, really. To do that, they ambitiously imported as many MMORPG characters from NCSoft's lineup of MMOs, uniting them under the MXM banner as playable heroes, known as Masters. You had characters from Guild Wars like Ritlock, Jin So-yoon from Blade and Soul, and Mondo Zax from WILDSTAR. The real outcry from a portion of the player base came when NCSoft introduced the Statesman, a character from City of Heroes that you will remember was mercilessly shut down by NCSoft. They had been sitting on the IP for 5 years and did nothing with it, only to roll out a MOBA hybrid with a COH character in it. There were boycott calls from former City of Heroes players, and while that wasn't the cause of the shutdown at all, it did alienate some players that would have otherwise given the game a go. I gave it a go and found the gameplay, especially its PvP mode, to be ridiculously addictive, and it has caught on big time with games like Battlerite now doing something similar. Sadly for NCSoft, they weren't making any money and didn't have a large enough player base to stake a claim in a saturated MOBA market, which led to its closure in 2018. And to wrap up this video, we have the 14th and 15th games, ASHERON'S Call 1 and 2. Two titles that are held in high esteem by most players who have played it, and many I know got their MMORPG starts within these worlds. ASHERON'S Call was released in 1999 by Microsoft and Turbine, and is one of the original 3 major MMORPGs of that era, alongside EverQuest and Ultima Online, who, with Dark Age of Camelot, laid plenty of groundwork for all the future MMORPGs to come. The 500 square mile virtual continent of Dareth was the home for close to 100,000 subscribers by the end of its first year, offering player avatars, PvE content, the occasional world events, and PvP in the form of PK battles. Its success spun a sequel, ASHERON'S Call 2 in 2002, featuring different graphics and gameplay, but was shut down in 2005 as it failed to achieve enough revenue and cultivate a thriving player population who were still content with the first game. Turbine decided to relaunch ASHERON'S Call 2 in 2012, however, offering server access to all subscribers of ASHERON'S Call. In late 2016, major shifts were happening within Turbine Studios. The company decided it no longer wished to pursue MMORPGs and planned to enter the mobile market. The studio's existing live MMORPGs, which were Lord of the Rings Online and Dungeons & Dragons Online, were transitioned to newly formed Standing Stone Games with the same personnel at the helm, but unfortunately, ASHERON'S Call 1 and 2 would not be joining them. In fact, the game was already in maintenance mode for a couple of years, with no updates, so that's the telling sign, really. Like several games on this list, players did try to buy the IP of Turbine, who wouldn't budge, and both games were finally shut down in January 2017. And in the case of ASHERON'S Call, a 17-year adventure for many had come to an end. But there were some great memories to be had, like the one time the players took on the devs in the infamous Shard Vigil defense. And that wraps up this brief list of 15 notable MMORPGs that shut down this decade, folks. There were dozens upon dozens of more MMOs that we lost over the last 9 years, and it's never nice or pleasant to see games end. And come the next decade, we're almost guaranteed to see more games go under, because this genre and industry is brutal and ever-changing, where second chances for games are as rare as winning the best rate loot drop roll on your first run. So my advice would be to cherish the games you play and love, and go make memories and friendships that last. That's it from me, folks. Before I go, does anyone have fond memories of any of the games in this list? Was there an MMORPG you enjoyed this decade that got shut down which isn't covered here? Share them with the rest of us in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you liked the video, and if you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe. It's free and lets you know when a new video is up. Once again, I'm Adrian, and I thank you for watching.